This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, coming to you live from the podcast layer. It's a beautiful day here in California. At some point, I hope that common sense comes back to California and the California dream, instead of slowly dying this death, it comes back. It roars back. We're somewhere between number 3 and number 5. I think we should be the number 2 economy in the world, right after the USA. And that could happen. So one of the things I'm going to talk about, because we have a monumental choice coming, is the California governor's race. I also wanted to say a little bit about some of my perspective on faith and socialism. I wanted to say a little bit about what's happening with the Supreme Court and the 14th Amendment. You know, what is the line in the 14th Amendment subject to the jurisdiction of? What does it actually mean? And then, because one of the biggest headlines is what's going on in Iran, depending on which news organization you listen to, it's either a potential place for hope or the biggest blunder that Trump has ever made, and it scares the heck out of everybody. I'm more on that hopeful side. But we're going to start with that idea of faith and socialism. They're almost polar opposites. Meaning, if you're for socialism, you're for big government. And once you're for big government, you tend to substitute big government for your faith. Christianity, multiple places in the Bible, talks about separation of church and state. Matter of fact, there were 2 brothers, if you were to look this up. And one was responsible for the people's faith, and the other brother, why he was responsible for governing them. There was a separation written right in there. The idea that there should be separate judges, that's a Christian idea. The idea that there's individual liberty, meaning there's choice. Whether it's a good choice or a bad choice, there's still choice. That choice doesn't exist so much in other religions. And so I think Christianity offers this place, this middle ground, where you can have both faith and good government. From my perspective, there's nothing good about socialism aside from it sounds all warm and fuzzy. But aside from sounding warm and fuzzy, it's a nice idea that just ignores human nature. By our very nature, we're going to take care of our friends. But guess what? Family before our friends. We're going to take care of our friends before we take care of our neighborhood. We're going to take care of our neighborhood before we take care of our local government. So the idea that, because socialism constantly accuses people of being greedy, so they want to use the state to confiscate the money from those that are successful. And let's face it, some of us are always going to be more successful. I'd like to think that's me sometimes, and then, God humbles me and I realize that, no, I'm just stumbling along like everybody else. But if you were to give, and they've done this experiment many, many times, if you were to give a group of, let's say 10 people, $100 each, and you leave them in a room and you say, I want you to do transactions for whatever you deem valuable, however you figure it out. And before long, it's not days, it's hours. Just a couple people in the room end up with most of the money. Now, potentially, if you weren't rooted in faith, you might use that money in a bad way. But if you're supposed to tithe to the church and you're supposed to have an obligation to take care of others, that obligation comes from the individual. It doesn't come, like socialism, from the obligation of, well, the state told me to do it. Well, if the state's telling me to do it and I can't see the good works that go with the confiscation of my money, that's what socialism does, it confiscates money and freedom, then I'm not going to work as hard, because I'm going to end up exactly in the same place as the person who didn't work. So what's the motivation? There isn't one. That's why socialism doesn't work in a nutshell. Moving on, just kind of an observation. Reading a little bit of the Bible, and that kind of just inspired me. I thought, well, wow, those are polar opposites. But moving on to the 14th Amendment. Okay, this one's a big one right now. It's before the Supreme Court. The Trump administration is arguing that birthright citizenship really doesn't apply to people that are here illegally. Now, if you looked at the 14th Amendment, it says, subject to the jurisdiction of. Now, why would that matter? If you're here illegally, if you snuck in, are you actually subject to the jurisdiction of the federal government? I don't think so. Now, I don't know how the Supreme Court's going to rule on this. But if they rule that the 14th Amendment stands as currently interpreted, I think it hurts our nation. The reason it hurts our nation is because if you're here illegally, you don't have the same motivation to assimilate. Not necessarily think exactly the same, but to buy into this American dream where you work hard, that we have generally a common culture that values individual liberty, that has a civil society that you become part of. But if, for instance, you were, I don't know, let's pick a country from northeastern Africa, Somalian. They brought their culture. They didn't adopt American culture. In their culture, if you don't find a way to scam the government, you're not helping your family like you could. It is the norm to protect your family and your tribe and screw over the government. It is one of the most corrupt nations on earth. And they brought that corruption as part of their culture here rather than adopted American culture. I'm not saying American culture doesn't have corruption. We just don't have it at the level of Somalia, except for a few places in Minnesota. And there seems to be a nice little group of Somalis that, for some reason, in Southern California, are running hospices and daycares just like in Minnesota. What could be the problem? Nothing to see here. Just relax, folks. In effect, what we now have happening with the 14th Amendment is you've got particularly Chinese. I'm sure they're not the only ethnic group that's doing this. They've got travel agencies. And those travel agencies set up a home, travel, everything for pregnant women that travel over here legally just in time during their 8th month of pregnancy to have their kid, and then they go home. Now, those kids are going to be raised in an entirely different culture. They're not going to value the things that we value here in America, like freedom, liberty. Or it's possible they could, but they're not raised with those values. But they're, according to how things stand today, they're U.S. citizens. And that's coming over legally. That's a scam that's going on. Recently in Southern California, there was this house. It had 31 women from China that were here during their 8th month just in time to pop out a kid so it could be a U.S. citizen. Now, these are not Americans. These are Chinese citizens that paid to do this. Now, you'd think we could stop that because that's clearly a scam. You know why it got shut down? Not because it was illegal under the 14th Amendment. It got shut down because you couldn't have 31 people in a house and it broke zoning rules. That's why they shut it down. That's how crazy this is.
Wow.
You add in the people that are not coming legally. I just gave you an example of illegal, not residents, but visitors. What if you came over illegally just to have a kid? There's quite a number of people, and I'm going to pick Mexico because it's the easiest, it's the low-hanging fruit. There are illegals from every country around the world. But I actually know some people because they've talked to me about their family, and they're first-generation Americans, but they have family members that have snuck across the border just in time to have a kid. The kid then is a U.S. citizen. They move back to Mexico, and they file for welfare here. So they're getting welfare for their kid while they live in Mexico.
Anchor babies, right?
Anchor babies. Now, not everybody moves back, but think of, you could live pretty good on those welfare payments in Mexico because the cost of living is so dramatically different as opposed to the ones that stay and have their anchor babies, because everything is so much more dramatically expensive. And in this case, my examples are from California, from long-term personal friends that I know from the Ramate. And if you don't know what a Ramate is, well, it's quite an experience. And with sunny California and the good weather, there's a whole lot of Ramates.
How do you say that?
Ramate.
I forgot. I'm Mexican and I don't even know how to say
You're
that.
barely Mexican. I'm more Mexican than you are.
Because you're throwing me off in the way you pronounce it. It's it's cherry auction.
Cherry
right?
auction would be a Ramate?
Yeah. The Ramate.
No, you're trying to throw an L in there.
No, the Ramate. I got to call the wife in the studio. She speaks great Spanish. But yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah.
Well, see, there we have proof. I'm just a little more Spanish.
A little bit more, yes. I have a lot of other blood in me too, but
well, I have none, but I grew up surrounded by mostly Mexican descent Hispanics all through grade school, most of high school, and then years and years at the Ramate.
Yeah, that's crazy though. What you're saying about the Chinese women being basically it's a factory house of
yes,
30 women. And I hear even Irvine and San Diego, there's cases in there.
Oh, yeah. It's all over Southern California. That seems to be their target area. I think the example I heard was they typically give about $17,000.
Whoa.
To come over. That includes their plane flight, round trip, and some housing for a month, and the delivery, but $17,000.
Wow. 17 grand?
17 grand.
And the CCP is not, paying for any of that.
Well, no, if you're a higher party member, you can make okay money. If you're just a cog, that's the part that people forget is in communism and frankly socialism, you're either a serf or you're part of the elite ruling class.
Okay.
I see socialism as it's kind of a different leadership at the top, but you still have a king and you have serfs.
Okay.
Which means most people are serfs.
Okay.
But some people are still making really good money in China.
Yeah.
Even under total authoritarian communist control.
Wow. Yeah, and by the way, I love your shirt. I love the shirt that you have
Oh,
here.
yes. This is one of my most treasured.
I had to see if we get that shot in there. Oh, there ever wonder why there are no Democrats on Mount Rushmore? Yeah, me neither. I love it. Where'd you get that? The Ramate?
No, that was
Hey, you know what I said?
Yeah, that sounded about right.
Yeah, I had to like go blank and get it better.
No, I bought this at a political event.
Okay.
I can't remember. Might have been at the Republican convention, but it might have also just been a more grassroots
At the
event.
Pink Ladies event?
Code Pink?
Code Pink, there you go. I couldn't get it.
I'm thinking that there's not a lot of Code Pink people that come to the Republican convention.
That's just your favorite code.
I mean, look, Republicans have their own brand of crazy, but it's not the Code Pink communist crazy.
Okay. Sorry, we digress a little bit. There,
Yes, we did.
But 14th Amendment, you got Somalia, you got the Chinese factories of housing pregnant women, and they're not assimilating their culture. They're refusing to learn the language. They're coming just for quick anchor babies, and we're throwing away golden tickets to everybody, especially under the Biden administration.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And if they're not here to embrace the American dream, and I want to point out that Somalia being one of the highest percentage, there's Somalis that have been here for 20 years, and they're still on government assistance. They didn't come pick up the mantle of meritocracy, work their butts off, and grab the American dream. They went, well, let's see, if I show up, I can just apply for all kinds of free money and sit on my butt.
Yeah, and that's hardworking Americans, business owners, and everything have to struggle and pay high taxes. And I don't mind hard work, but man, there's a lot of red tape, regulation, and then all the people, the fraudsters, are coming in and taking a lot of the hand-me-outs.
Yep. I'm going to go ahead and shift gears a little bit. I'm going to move over to Iran. That's big in the news right now. And, if you listen to CNN, MSNBC, it's not even MSNBC anymore. It's something else.
Something now.
MS Now.
Yeah.
Well, they ran out of old ways to BS you, so now they're doing something new. And they talk about how this is the worst thing ever. Well, there's all kinds of long-standing worry from both the right and the left about Iran.
Yeah.
If you enrich uranium to 60%, and you don't need it at 60% for any power source, okay, you're a very small step away to 90%. 90% is typically what they need for an actual nuclear weapon. 60% is what they need for what they would call a dirty bomb. And Iran never stopped doing that. For about 47 years, Iran has been chanting, at least their government has been chanting. I don't know about all the people. I know some Persians, they prefer not to be called Iranians, but called Persians, who are absolutely patriots that are here, I've met in California, seem to be great people. Yeah, I'm not going to say seem to be. They're great people. I've known quite a few, had the privilege of knowing quite a few in the last 30 years. But the government of Iran has been chanting death to America. Now, that wouldn't be such a big deal if it was just in a bubble. It's not. Because as they chant death to America, they fund Hezbollah. And they don't just fund them with money. They give them missiles, weapons, largely to take out Israel. They fund Hamas, who, it was Hamas, wasn't it? That day where they slaughtered hundreds of Israeli citizens. Now, from my perspective, that was unprovoked because those were people that were just out celebrating on a Jewish holy day, and they slaughtered them. They captured some of them. They raped and beat a whole bunch of them. Hamas are just animals. So I'm not.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm not saying Israel's perfect. I understand why they've been raised in the Palestinian people have been raised to believe that Israel is little Satan, and guess what? So death to Israel. That's what the whole from, what is it, to the sea?
Yeah. Something, the water to the sea. Something like that, yeah.
Basically, if you understand that statement, it means wipe Israel off the map.
Yeah.
Well, Israel's a tolerant, just tolerant.
Yeah.
They're a tolerant democracy. There is some freedom there. Are they flawed? Yep.
Yeah.
So they're one of our few friends in the Middle East. Now, maybe Trump has shifted some of that.
Yeah.
But we'll see. So, and I forgot about the Houthis.
Yeah.
Over in Yemen. Why, they bombed American ships, and they're just one more example of Iran exerting its power through terrorist organizations.
So we were justified going then.
At least I understand why.
You understand why? Okay.
Okay.
So you won't say yes, but
I won't quite say yes. I'll say,
okay.
Look, if I had as much information, because I'm sure there's a whole bunch of information that is classified, because Trump gambled everything on this.
Like we had information on Iraq, on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Yeah, well, sometimes we're wrong.
Okay.
I'll give you that.
Okay.
But it's
great track record. Okay. I'm sorry. Sorry.
I would say most of the time we get things like that right, though we always see it through our perspective.
Yeah.
But with Iran, you've got this government, theocracy, authoritarian government that kept chanting death to America, kept enriching oil, cut a deal with the Obama administration where rather than allowing true transparency to their nuclear operations, because they claimed it was just for power, but you never need to enrich to 60% if it's just for power. Obama sent them billions of dollars of cash and basically talked about how the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard was the call to prayer, the Islamic call to prayer.
Yeah.
So makes me kind of question what's going on here. So 47 years they live under tyranny. By the way, women can't drive in Iran. Women can't show their face. If a woman is raped, she needs 2 male witnesses because her testimony and, let's say, forensic evidence wouldn't be good enough. She would lose in court.
Yeah. I'm glad we're going out there and saving them and bombing everything over there. We're saving them for those things.
Women don't have the right to vote in Iran. Now, that one, a little sketchy, but mostly I think it's good that women have the right to vote. It's just the liberal women here in the United States that kind of scare me.
Okay.
But, most women I meet, I'm very glad they have the right to vote. But the blue hairs are a little toxic.
But you want to,
and I don't mean old. I mean dyed blue hair or pink hair. They're kind of like the poison dart toads, from South America. Okay. They're these bright, brilliant colors. That's how you know they're toxic at a glance. Same thing with the liberal women.
But you want to be on the record like Trump. I'm for the women.
Yes, I am.
Sorry.
So
Iran, yeah.
Yeah, so we went in and basically bombed the hell out of them. Now, we know that they were cutting deals with China. So this is bigger than Iran. And that about 60% of China's oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz. That's a little narrow channel that allows the oil from oil country to go all the way over to China most of the time it goes through just north of Indonesia. Kind of hugs along the bottom of Asia. Well, if China was getting that oil through deals it brokered that were absolutely, even by the United Nations, banned. Because, the United Nations saw Iran as a bad actor. It affects China. Well, if China doesn't have cheap energy, they don't have the competitive prices. Because their labor is still cheaper than ours. But without cheap energy, China stops growing. It's part of why China's been smart enough to build a whole lot of nuclear reactors and a whole lot of coal plants. So they're not just reliant on oil. While we sat on our hands and did nothing. Now, not so much during the Trump administration, but unquestionably during Obama, unquestionably during Bush before him, Jr., unquestionably, well, who knows what happened during the Biden administration, because I don't know that Joe was awake most of the time. And whoever was running and watching the hen house for Joe Biden, we don't even really know who at this point. We have guesses, but we don't even know who. Who signed all those executive orders? Who signed all of those pardons more than any other president ever? In 4 years, more than any other president ever. But I'm not saying Joe Biden's corrupt because, how could that be?
No. He's fine. He's perfect. He just might be asleep, but he's perfectly asleep.
Well, he's perfectly asleep, and, Hunter was... his family just happened to do well because of his position.
Yeah.
Nothing to see there, folks. Nothing to see. I'm going to go ahead and shift over. Well, before I shift over, I do want to say I'm hopeful in Iran. I'm hopeful because if we got rid of the largest terror threat the world has seen in at least my lifetime, because Hitler was long gone, Hirohito was long gone, Mussolini was long gone by the time I was born. So in my lifetime, what's going to happen in that power vacuum? We don't know, but we know that potentially, Iran could be a place where something really great happens. The Middle East has sunk multiple empires. But it also could be the place where maybe we begin to see hope. And so in my prayers, I will be hoping for a good outcome. At least people aren't oppressed the same way, and hopefully that will, when they develop a government, maybe there'll be some beacons of freedom in the Middle East, and Israel won't be our only actual democracy in the Middle East and our only friend there. I consider Israel to be kind of a difficult friend, a friend that often makes wrong choices, but generally deserves our support. I hope that Iran can come into that same space. Shifting space to Governor Newsom. Before we get into the California governor race, I came across this. It's a little old, but I found it. Well, actually, my producer found it. Philville.
Yeah.
And I think it's hilarious. It shows just the level that our current governor of California will go to try to be cool. And he's just not. He's just basically a lying, narcissistic. I only have 4-letter words after that. I had to stop for a minute. Sorry.
Okay, got it here.
All right, let's take a look. Yeah, isn't Gavin cool there? Like, he can't even relax. He just has to pretend like, oh, yeah, I'm cool like Usher.
Wow.
Now, this is not the first time he has interacted with people of much darker skin.
Look at that. Look at that.
Largely African Americans. You know, one time he said to them, well, I'm just like you. I can't read.
What? I
Now, that's pretty insulting.
Wow. Yeah. That's crazy.
So another time he went on a podcast of 2 ex-NBA players, and he talked about how he had to grind and, you know, how life was tough when he was growing up. Now, his mom wasn't rich, but his dad was seriously rich and was associated with the richest man at the time in California, you know, good friends with. I can't remember which Getty. It's part of the Getty family. I don't remember the first name of the guy.
And he's related to Pelosi, right?
Yes.
He's the nephew or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So Gavin talking about how he's a poor little rich boy just to suck up. That's what we got today. We got a guy that's all about images, all about me.
Wow.
And all about Trump derangement because it gets him more attention. And that's his focus, is getting more attention. And now we've got a governor's race because finally Gavin's got to go. And we're down to, let's say 7 candidates, 5 leading candidates, 2 on the edge. So I'm going to start with the leading Democratic candidate, Eric Swalwell. You know, Eric Swalwell, who was on the January 6th Commission, which I thoroughly believe was a setup. Eric Swalwell that repeatedly talked about the Russia collusion, which was found out to be a Hillary Clinton paid for dossier, all based on bullshit. Eric Swalwell, who, one of the most famous things about him is the fact that on national TV, he let one rip, but he didn't sort of let one rip. He stunk up the room. Even the person that was interviewing him's face turned. Now, I guess stuff happens once in a while. More importantly, we can go to judgment. Eric Swalwell, that why he got suckered in, whether he was actually complicit with this Chinese spy, Fang Fang, or he just got suckered in by a Chinese spy and for giving away secrets. Again, the FBI at the time was controlled by Obama, or was it Biden? It was one or the other. So it's not as clear to me, was he really innocent? I don't know. I know that if you get suckered in by a spy and then you get kicked off the Intel committee, even though they didn't bring charges, that's kind of a big deal. So I don't trust Eric Swalwell's judgment a whole lot. He's a hardcore leftist.
Yep.
His most important thing is, I'm anti-Trump. And then there's the new allegations against Eric Swalwell. Now we have multiple women that worked for him that are saying, no, he's a sexual abuser. Nobody's actually said rape, but apparently some of them did have sex with him under duress, would be a nice way to put that. No, I'm just going by what one woman said. I don't know the facts of the case. I just know that by democratic standards, if a woman accuses a man of something, she must be believed. I remember Hillary saying that. I remember Nancy Pelosi saying that. I remember Chuck Schumer saying that. I remember Obama saying that. I remember Michelle Obama saying that. So by those standards, he's already guilty, right? Forget about the rule of law. He's guilty. Little joke there. I actually believe in the rule of law. But it looks really bad. This guy doesn't have good judgment, and yet he is the leading Democrat. He's in third place currently in the polls.
Wow.
But he's the leading Democrat. Then you've got the woman that yells and screams at her kid, yells and screams at a staffer, throws things, behaves like a child, named Katie Porter. The same woman that was having a fair interview and she got asked a tough question and she had a little childish meltdown and stormed off. Again, much like a child.
Yeah.
She's ruled by her emotions. This is the number 2 Democrat.
Wow.
The number 3 Democrat eagerly advocates for socialism, has already spent something like $35 million of his own money because, he's not just a liberal that's advocating for socialist policies. He's a billionaire advocating for socialist policies. I wonder if he's actually going to give it all away so that, he has as much money as I do. Think what we could do with billions, Phil. Even if we had to split it with other people. Couldn't you handle an extra, let's say, 50 grand?
Where are these people coming from? The options they have. It's just...
Well, I'm almost to their one halfway reasonable, I'd never vote for the guy, but halfway reasonable option. And he's in a distant 6th place. So don't trust Steyer. The other problem with Steyer is if you really try to focus in as he's speaking, you make sure you're not in a comfortable chair because you just might fall asleep. The man has just no charisma. This isn't like a huge dig, just, hey, no charisma. From the left, I guess he's right on issues, but it seems weird that as much as they talk about how everything needs to be even and fair and we need to do the right thing, that they're advocating for a white billionaire. Why is a white billionaire doing so well in the polls? Well, because he spent $36 million of his own money to push his name. Also, interestingly, before I get to that halfway reasonable Democratic candidate, they were having a candidate forum, and they only wanted the top 5 names. People that are in the double digits, 10% or more. And the left had a meltdown because they didn't have people like Javier Becerra or former HUD secretary or Antonio Villaraigosa, former mayor of L.A., Betty Yee, Tony Thurmond. Betty Yee was a former controller, I believe. Tony Thurmond is he's the head education person in California. I can't remember the title of that position. But they were all in single digits. Interestingly enough, every one of them has darker skin than I do. So the left decided to have a little meltdown because there was no diversity. In other words, all of the candidates at the top were white. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange because we seem to have a woman who's a lesbian. Well, that's one type of diversity, just not the kind they wanted at the moment. We've got Swalwell, who is a narcissist. Isn't that a special kind of group by itself? Much like Gavin. You got Steyer, who, I mean, he's very much in a minority. He's a billionaire advocating for socialism. Isn't that a little diversity? Anyway.
Yeah.
In that sixth position, you've got one more Democrat who is not as horrible. He's almost like an old school Democrat, probably not going to break through. That is Matt McMahon. He is mayor of San Jose. He is reasonably moderate, though my experience with moderate Democrats in the modern age, meaning the last 20 years, is they say those things and then they vote at every opportunity for hardcore leftism. Now, I don't know.
Yeah, Joe Biden was a moderate, they considered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, but he's not as horrible. How's that? There's not a lot of trust on my part because there's not a lot of trust on my part with Democrats. And then we get to what's going on in the Republican race. So I'm going to start with the guy that's on the outside. There's a bunch of guys on the outside, and I like a lot of the guys that were on the outside. But if by now you're not at double digits in the polls, you're not going anywhere. So those top three Democrats, there's something like 14, 12, and 10%. They're all right in that range. The two Republicans that are somewhere are somewhere around 16%, 17%, maybe 18%, depending on the poll. That would be Chad Bianco and Steve Hilton. And then the guy on the outside who's really just barely showing up is Leo Zaki. But Leo seems to be the only Republican, aside from Bianco and Hilton, that is going to be considered at the Republican State Convention for endorsement. So Leo did something. Love Leo. Wish Leo had broken through. I think he's out of time. Think he's absolutely a good guy. He would be my first choice. But I got to go with the Republican that I think that has the best chance to win. So that puts us down to a tale of two Republicans. Very different men, very different backgrounds. One's a sheriff. The other's got some political background from England and was a political commentator on Fox News. I like things about both of them. Bianco's generally a little stronger in how he says something, but he doesn't get the details right. I think he's a little late to the party on a lot of things, meaning, like, my understanding, I hear from insiders, is that he knew about all this fraud in his county, all this election fraud. Why did he wait so late to confiscate those ballots and have an investigation? If it was the right thing to do, kind of a little late. But I love his stance on crime. Though he does not do a great job of talking about the institutional fraud, he does a great job of talking about the day-to-day things that have to do with crime. So, not terrible. I also have some real problems with Bianco kneeling. And I've been there feet away from him, less than 5 feet away, as he was interviewed by a friend of mine. And I believe he was absolutely lying about why he kneeled. Now, the fact, because he says he's just praying, but his body language did not tell me that. If he was just praying, then why this whole long song and dance? We had a story that's slightly changed over time. It looked like he chose to kneel to resolve the conflict. Now, if in the moment that's what he believed he needed to do to resolve the conflict, I would disagree with his choice, but I wasn't there in the moment. What I have a problem with is I thoroughly believe he's lying to me about he was just praying. Because I've seen a lot of prayer, and I don't know any Christians that I've ever seen pray on one knee unless they're physically handicapped somehow. Everybody else seems to pray on 2 knees or stand up to pray. So it didn't make a lot of sense, and his hands weren't quite in prayer position either. Just highly suspicious. With that being said, I think he's a little stronger than Hilton on social issues. Like when it comes to life, when it comes to abortion, he spoke right up, and Steve kind of waffled a little bit. So I appreciate things about Chad Bianco. I'm not saying I wouldn't vote for him. I'm going to vote for the Republican that has the momentum and the lead when we get right near the election, because we can't afford to not have have another Democrat governor. We can't afford to not have a Republican in this race. So, getting to Steve Hilton. Okay, some things worry me. His wife has a lot of connections with fairly liberal organizations. When he was part of the government in Great Britain, the Cameron government, it was the conservative government, but I want to point out that things are much more left there. So that's like saying he was part of a modern left conservative group. Their conservatives are like our left, at least say 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. So that worries me a little bit. He's not quite as strong, though he's highly articulate. Chad is very strong in how he says things. Hilton, on the other hand, he's not quite as strong as how he says it, but he understands the details of it amazingly well. Really articulates ideas well. A positive for Steve, aside from articulating ideas well, is in early 2023, he came up with the Golden California Plan. This was before he denounced his British citizenship. By the way, he does not have a dual citizenship. He has denounced it. He is just an American. He has been through the process. He had his Golden California Plan, a plan to fix a state that he had moved to, chosen, and has come to love. So early 2023, long before, almost 3 years ago now. Just about 3 years ago now. I have pictures of him supporting small-term candidates or small assembly candidates, Senate candidates like Joanna Rose Garcia, Ali Macedo, David Tangipa. 2 of the 3 got elected. Sorry, Joanna, but hopefully she'll run for something again at some point, though she might not like me if I said that. So he was working, and these were little tiny events. He would be traveling up and down the state, trying to fix California, and he realized one of the ways to do it was to change who was in the legislature. So he's been working at this for years. And it wasn't all about drawing attention to himself. He was doing the right thing. Now, Steve Hilton was endorsed by Trump. What was that, Monday? I think it was Monday night. For me, that means most likely it's Steve Hilton. Now, we'll see. The Chad Bianco people are going to hate me for ever saying anything negative about him. Again, if he finds a way to be ahead, and I feel he has the momentum as we get near this vote, because we still got more than a month, I would switch gears. But we have to get a Republican in, one that we can believe in, and I believe that both Bianco and Hilton, are good men. With the Trump endorsement, I think it's got to be Hilton. I was leaning Hilton anyway. Hope my friends that are all Bianco, they're not going to hate me. Look, I'm trying to do the best I can for California, be an advocate for the change, for the common sense that California needs. It's time to wake up, get to the polls. We have 2 things on the ballot. One is voter ID, the other is Prop 13. If that doesn't get you there to try to change California, I don't know what does. Folks, it's a beautiful day out there. May you count your blessings. I'll see you next week. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist.